They requested reinforcements. They got humans who made survival an art. The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to listen. Commander Zeftai of the Galactic Defense Coalition pressed his four-fingered hand against his temple, trying to ease the pain that had been building for the past 3 rotations. The holographic display in front of him showed the same devastating picture it had shown for weeks now. The Kithara were winning. "Sir, we've received another distress call from the Kepler 442 system," reported Lieutenant Velna, her scaled skin shifting from blue to a worried purple. "The mining colonies on Kepler 442b are requesting immediate evacuation. They estimate they have maybe 6 cycles before the Kithara fleet reaches them." Zeftai's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The Kithara had appeared from the dark space between galaxies 3 months ago, bringing with them ships that seemed to bend reality itself. Their technology was beyond anything the Coalition had ever encountered. Worse, they didn't seem interested in negotiation, communication, or even conquest in any traditional sense. They simply consumed everything in their path, stripping planets bare of resources and leaving behind lifeless rocks floating in space. "What about the 4th Fleet?" Zeftai asked, though he already knew the answer. "Still engaged in the Vega sector, sir. Admiral Korth reports they're barely holding the line. The 7th Fleet—" Velna paused, her skin now a deep shade of grief purple. "The 7th Fleet was destroyed yesterday defending the agricultural worlds of Tau Ceti." The command center fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. Zeftai looked around at his staff, seeing the same expression on every face, regardless of species. Fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you're facing extinction and there's nothing you can do about it. "Sir?" called out Communications Officer Trixvoll from his station, his insectoid features clicking with excitement. "We're receiving a response to our general distress beacon. It's coming from—" "This is strange. It's coming from a system that's not in our databases. The signal identifies itself as being from something called the Human Space Navy." Zeftai's eye stalks swiveled toward the communications station. "Human? I've never heard of that species. Are they part of the Outer Rim worlds?" "Negative, sir. The signal is coming from a region of space we've classified as uninhabited. Coordinates suggest it's from the spiral arm designated as Sector 7 Alpha, approximately 27,000 light-years from the galactic core." "That's impossible," muttered Science Officer Quindale, her tentacles writhing with confusion. "Our long-range surveys of that area showed no signs of advanced civilization. Nothing but a few primitive worlds with basic carbon-based life forms." The main view screen flickered to life, showing a face that made several officers step backward in shock. The creature looking back at them was unlike anything in the Coalition database. It had only 2 eyes, positioned side by side on a face that was disturbingly flat. Its skin was a pale pinkish color, and most unsettling of all, it had only 4 limbs total. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Space Navy," the creature said, its voice carrying strange emotional undertones that the universal translator struggled to interpret. "We received your distress call. We understand you're facing an extinction-level threat. We'd like to help." Zeftai approached the screen cautiously. "I am Commander Zeftai of the Galactic Defense Coalition. With respect, Admiral Chen, this conflict is beyond anything your species has likely encountered. The Kithara possess technology that has overwhelmed our most advanced fleets. Unless your people have weapons capable of destroying entire star systems, I'm not sure what assistance you could provide." The human's mouth curved upward in what the database identified as either a threat display or an expression of positive emotion. Given the circumstances, Zeftai wasn't sure which interpretation was correct. "Commander, my species has something that might be more valuable than advanced weapons," Admiral Chen replied. "We have experience with impossible odds. How soon can you get us detailed information about these Kithara?" Within hours, the Coalition transmitted everything they knew about the enemy. The Kithara ships were massive, some the size of small moons. They absorbed energy weapons, shrugged off kinetic attacks, and seemed to regenerate damage almost instantly. Their tactics were simple but effective. They approached a system, eliminated all resistance, and then systematically stripped every world of its resources. 3 days later, a human fleet arrived at Coalition headquarters. HFY watched through the observation deck as the human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They were small, laughably small compared to Coalition vessels. Where Coalition ships were graceful curves designed for maximum efficiency, human ships looked like they'd been built in someone's backyard using spare parts. "Those are warships?" Lieutenant Velna asked, her skin cycling through confused colors. Admiral Chen materialized on the command deck via transportation technology that the Coalition's scientists immediately began analyzing. In person, she was even more unsettling. Humans, it turned out, were only slightly taller than the average Coalition species. But something about their posture suggested they were ready to spring into action at any moment. "I know our ships don't look like much," Chen said, apparently reading their expressions correctly. "But we've learned that survival isn't about having the biggest gun. It's about adapting faster than your enemy expects." She activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional map of the local systems. "We've been studying your data on the Kithara. You've been fighting them like a conventional military force. That's not going to work. These aren't conquerors, they're consumers. They don't think like military strategists. They think like, well, like locusts." "Then how do you propose we stop them?" HFY asked. Chen's expression shifted to something that made several Coalition officers unconsciously step backward. "We don't stop them, Commander. We teach them that eating us comes with a cost they're not willing to pay." Over the next several hours, Admiral Chen outlined what she called the human doctrine of asymmetric response. It was unlike anything in Coalition military theory. Where Coalition strategy focused on fleet engagements and territorial defense, human strategy seemed to focus on making the enemy's life as difficult as possible through what they termed creative problem-solving. "Your people have been trying to fight the Kithara fleet to fleet," Chen explained. "That's like trying to fight a forest fire with a garden hose. Instead, we're going to make them understand that every world they try to consume will cost them more than it's worth." The human fleet consisted of only 50 ships, but each vessel carried technology that violated several fundamental assumptions about space warfare. Their weapons were designed not to destroy enemy ships, but to disable, confuse, and frustrate them. More importantly, each human ship carried what Chen called persistence packages, small automated systems designed to continue causing problems long after the main human force had moved on. "The key to fighting a consumer species," Chen continued, "is to make consumption unprofitable. We're going to turn every world they want into a trap, every resource they need into a weapon against them, and every victory they achieve into a reason to leave this galaxy alone." HFY found himself both fascinated and terrified by human military philosophy. "Admiral, with respect, the Kithara have destroyed entire fleets. How can 50 ships accomplish what thousands of our vessels could not?" Chen activated another holographic display, this one showing what appeared to be historical data from human conflicts. "Commander, my species evolved on a world where literally everything was trying to kill us. We learned to survive not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the most stubborn. We made survival into an art form." The display showed images of human conflicts throughout their history. HFY watched in growing amazement as he saw examples of humans fighting from seemingly hopeless positions and somehow emerging victorious through sheer refusal to give up. "This is the siege of Leningrad," Chen narrated as images flashed by. "My people held a city under siege for 872 days, eating wallpaper paste and tree bark to survive, because surrendering simply wasn't an option. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held off an army of hundreds of thousands through tactical superiority and absolute determination. This is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where civilians with improvised weapons fought trained soldiers because they refused to go quietly into extinction. The historical examples continued, each one more improbable than the last. Humans fighting in deserts, jungles, cities, and space. Humans winning battles they should have lost and surviving situations that should have been fatal. But what struck HFY most was not the violence, but the creativity. You see, Commander, Chen concluded, humans don't just fight to win, we fight to make the other side regret ever picking a fight with us in the first place. The Cathara think they're the apex predators in this galaxy. We're about to show them what happens when apex predators meet persistence hunters. That night, HFY found himself unable to sleep. He kept reviewing the human historical data, trying to understand how a species could develop such an approach to warfare. The Coalition's military doctrine was based on overwhelming force, technological superiority, and decisive battles. Human doctrine seemed to be based on the assumption that any conflict worth fighting was worth fighting dirty. The next morning brought news that the Cathara had begun their assault on the Kepler 442 system. 3 massive consumer ships had arrived and were systematically working their way through the outer planets. Coalition forces in the area were evacuating civilians as quickly as possible, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the entire system fell. Admiral Chen, HFY called as he entered the human command post that had been established aboard the Coalition flagship. The Cathara have begun their attack on Kepler 442. Are your forces ready to deploy? Chen looked up from a tactical display that showed more information about human ship positions than should have been possible to gather in such a short time. We've been ready since we arrived, Commander. But I want to make sure you understand what you're asking. Once we engage the Cathara using human methods, there's no going back. This isn't going to be a clean, honorable battle. This is going to be messy, unconventional, and probably disturbing to watch. Admiral, my people are facing extinction. Honor is a luxury we can no longer afford. Chen nodded slowly. In that case, Commander, you're about to learn why humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. As the human fleet prepared to depart for Kepler 4, the first sign that the human approach to warfare was unlike anything the Galactic Defense Coalition had ever seen came when Admiral Chen's fleet arrived at Kepler 442. Instead of engaging the 3 massive Cathara consumer ships directly, the human vessels scattered like startled fish, disappearing behind asteroids, moons, and debris fields. Commander HFY watched the tactical display with growing confusion. Admiral Chen, your ships appear to be retreating. The Cathara vessels are continuing their consumption of the 4th planet. Shouldn't we be engaging them? Chen's voice crackled over the communication system with what sounded like amusement. Commander, you're watching humans do what humans do best. Make the other guy think they understand the situation. Give us about 6 hours, then tell me what you think of our retreat. The Cathara ships continued their systematic destruction of Kepler 442, seemingly unaware of the human presence. Their massive forms moved through space like living mountains, extending tendrils of energy that stripped away the planet's atmosphere and surface materials. It was a sight that had terrified coalition forces across 17 systems, the unstoppable consumption of entire worlds. But as the hours passed, strange things began to happen. The first incident occurred when the primary Cathara vessel attempted to process a large asteroid that had been floating near the planet. The moment the ship's consumption beam touched the asteroid, a series of explosions erupted across the Cathara hull. Not large explosions, but hundreds of small ones, like a skin condition that wouldn't stop itching. What was that? Lieutenant Velna asked, her skin shifting to curious orange. Mining charges, came Chen's voice. "We spent the last 3 hours hollowing out asteroids and filling them with presents. The Cathara eat everything they touch, so we made sure they'd get some indigestion." The second incident came an hour later. The lead Cathara ship extended its feeding tendrils toward what appeared to be a particularly mineral-rich section of the planet's crust. Instead of the expected easy consumption, the tendrils encountered resistance. Something was fighting back, actively interfering with the consumption process. Zeftai enhanced the display resolution and saw something that made his mandibles click in disbelief. Tiny human ships, no larger than shuttlecraft, were darting between the Cathara tendrils like insects harassing a much larger predator. They weren't trying to destroy the tendrils. They were coating them with some kind of substance that interfered with their function. "Polymer compound," Chen explained when asked. "Hardens on contact with the specific energy signature the Cathara use for consumption. Think of it as cosmic superglue. It doesn't hurt them, but it makes eating very annoying." By the end of the first day, the pattern became clear. The Cathara weren't being attacked in any traditional sense. They were being irritated to death. Every asteroid they tried to consume exploded with small charges. Every planet they approached turned out to have been seeded with interference devices. Every easy target became a source of problems they had to solve before they could feed. "This is impossible," muttered Science Officer Quindall. "How did your people deploy so many devices so quickly? Our sensors detected nothing." "That's because you were looking for ships and weapons," Chen replied. "You weren't looking for humans in environmental suits with cutting tools and bad attitudes. My people have been working non-stop since we arrived, turning this system into the galactic equivalent of a meal that fights back." The true genius of the human approach became apparent on the second day. The Cathara, frustrated by the constant interference, began changing their tactics. Instead of their usual systematic consumption, they started trying to eliminate the source of their problems. This meant diverting energy and attention from feeding to hunting, something they were clearly not designed for. Human ships would appear long enough to cause a problem, then vanish into the maze of modified asteroids, disabled satellites, and debris fields that the humans had created throughout the system. The Cathara would pursue, only to find that their massive ships were poorly suited for navigation in cluttered environments. "You've turned the entire star system into a trap," Zeftai realized. "Better than that," Chen replied. "We've turned it into a teaching tool. Every minute the Cathara spend here, they're learning that consuming this galaxy is going to cost them time, energy, and resources they can't afford to lose, and we're just getting started." The third day brought escalation. The Cathara deployed smaller hunter-killer ships, clearly hoping to deal with the human harassment more effectively. This was exactly what Admiral Chen had been waiting for. "Now we get to show them what humans call asymmetric warfare," she announced. The human response was immediate and devastating, but not in any way the coalition had expected. Instead of engaging the Cathara hunters directly, the humans led them on a chase through the asteroid field they had prepared. Every asteroid the hunters passed was actually a carefully disguised trap. Some exploded when approached. Others released clouds of the same polymer compound that had been plaguing the main ships. Still others projected false sensor readings that sent the hunters chasing ghosts. But the masterpiece of human tactical thinking was revealed when one of the Cathara hunters actually caught a human ship. Instead of being destroyed, the human vessel allowed itself to be captured and drawn into the hunter's processing bay. 30 seconds later, the hunter ship began experiencing what Chen cheerfully described as catastrophic indigestion. "We call it a Trojan horse," Chen explained, as the coalition watched the hunter ship tear itself apart from within. Ancient human tactic. Sometimes the best way to get inside an enemy's defenses is to let them capture you. Of course, it helps if you've filled your ship with every nasty surprise you can think of. By the end of the third day, the situation had become surreal. 3 massive Cathara ships, each capable of destroying entire fleets, were being systematically frustrated by 50 small human vessels. They couldn't feed efficiently because every target had been booby-trapped. They couldn't hunt effectively because their prey was using tactics that violated everything they understood about space combat. Most importantly, they were learning that this galaxy contained creatures that refused to be consumed quietly. Commander HFY found himself in the unusual position of feeling sorry for an extinction-level threat. Admiral Chen, the Cathara appear to be confused. Confusion is the first stage of learning, Chen replied. These creatures have probably consumed hundreds of galaxies without ever encountering serious resistance. They think of other species as food, not as opponents. We're teaching them that some food fights back. The lesson was driven home on the 4th day when the Cathara attempted to leave the system. The humans had been preparing for this possibility. As the massive ships tried to accelerate to faster-than-light speeds, they found their path blocked by what appeared to be a simple debris field. But when they tried to clear the debris, each piece revealed itself to be another nasty surprise. Some of the debris pieces were actually camouflaged human ships that immediately began attaching devices to the Cathara hulls. Others were automated systems that deployed massive nets designed to tangle the Cathara's propulsion systems. Still others were broadcasting devices that began transmitting the entire battle to every corner of known space. "You're making sure everyone knows what happened here," HFY observed. "Information warfare," Chen confirmed. "By tomorrow, every species in this galaxy will know that the unstoppable Cathara spent 4 days being humiliated by a species they'd never heard of. Fear is a powerful weapon, but so is embarrassment. The Cathara won't be able to intimidate anyone if everyone knows they can be beaten by clever tactics and stubborn determination." But the humans weren't finished. As the Cathara finally managed to clear enough debris to begin their escape, they found themselves facing a final surprise. Every human ship in the system simultaneously broadcast the same message on all frequencies: an invitation. "Unknown species," Admiral Chen's voice echoed through space. "You are welcome to stay and continue your attempts to consume this system. We have prepared many more surprises for your entertainment. Alternatively, you are welcome to leave and find a galaxy that doesn't contain humans. The choice is yours. But understand that every world you attempt to consume in this galaxy will cost you what you have experienced here." The Cathara response was immediate. All 3 ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the space between stars, leaving behind a partially consumed planet and a very confused coalition fleet. "They're leaving," Lieutenant Velna said, her skin cycling through amazed colors. "They're actually leaving." "Of course they are," Chen replied. "We made consuming this galaxy more expensive than profitable. That's the only language a consumer species really understands." In the aftermath, as coalition engineers surveyed the battlefield, they began to understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. The entire star system had been converted into a 3-dimensional chess game where every piece was a weapon and every move was a trap. Asteroids had been hollowed out and filled with surprises. Debris fields had been arranged to funnel enemy movement into kill zones. Even the electromagnetic signature of the star itself had been modified to interfere with Cathara sensors. This level of tactical preparation should have taken months, Quindal reported. "How did your people accomplish this in 3 days?" Chen smiled, an expression that the coalition was learning to find both reassuring and terrifying. "Officer Quindal, when your species spends its entire evolutionary history trying to survive on a world where everything wants to kill you, you learn to work fast. We didn't just prepare this system for battle, we prepared it for survival. The Cathara learned that humans don't just fight, we make war into an art form." As the human fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Chen transmitted detailed tactical information to every coalition world. The plans included instructions for asteroid modify 6 months after the incident at Kepler 442. The galaxy was a very different place. Word of humanity's victory over the Cathara had spread through every inhabited system, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who had witnessed the impossible. The story grew with each telling, but the core message remained the same. The unstoppable force had been stopped by an immovable object, and that object was human stubbornness. Commander HFY stood in the Coalition's new Strategic Innovation Center, watching dozens of species work together to implement what had become known as human doctrine. The center itself was a testament to how much things had changed. 6 months ago, Coalition military thinking had been rigid, hierarchical, and focused on conventional fleet engagements. Now the walls were covered with diagrams showing asteroid modification techniques, debris field tactics, and something called Murphy's Law integration strategies. "Report from the Vega sector, sir," announced Lieutenant Velna, her skin now displaying the confident gold patterns that had become common since the Coalition learned they could actually win this war. The Altarian fleet successfully repelled a Cathara probe using modified human tactics. 3 consumer ships approached their primary world, encountered prepared positions, and withdrew after 18 hours of what Admiral Thys described as educational harassment. HFY's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. "Any casualties?" "Minimal on our side. The Cathara lost 2 hunter-killer ships and reportedly consumed several asteroids filled with what the Altarians called spicy rocks, mining charges mixed with industrial solvents. The probe fleet departed the system, broadcasting what our linguists believe was the Cathara equivalent of frustrated profanity. It had taken time for the Coalition to understand that the humans hadn't just won a single battle. They had fundamentally changed the nature of the war itself. The Cathara had arrived expecting to find scattered, terrified civilizations that would collapse at the first sign of their overwhelming power. Instead, they found a galaxy that had learned to think like humans, stubborn, creative, and absolutely determined to make conquest more trouble than it was worth. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many Coalition species had struggled with human concepts like acceptable losses, tactical retreats that were actually advances, and winning by making the other guy give up. The idea of deliberately allowing enemy ships to capture prepared positions so they could be destroyed from within had been particularly difficult for honor-based warrior cultures to accept. But the results spoke for themselves. In the 6 months since first contact with humanity, the Cathara had attempted to consume 14 different star systems. They had succeeded in fully consuming exactly 0. Every world they approached had become a maze of traps, surprises, and what humans called learning experiences. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Trixvol, his insectoid features clicking with excitement, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Chen. She's requesting immediate conference with all Coalition leadership." The main view screen activated, showing Admiral Chen aboard what appeared to be a new class of human vessel. The ship's bridge was smaller than Coalition standards would suggest, but it hummed with an efficiency that HFY had learned to associate with human engineering. Behind Chen, he could see displays showing real-time tactical information from across the galaxy. "Commander HFY," Chen began, "I have news that your leadership needs to hear immediately. We've made contact with the Cathara." A shocked silence fell over the Coalition command center. "Contact?" HFY asked. "You mean actual communication?" "Full diplomatic contact," Chen confirmed. "It turns out that when you frustrate a consumer species enough, they eventually decide they need to understand what they're dealing with. 3 days ago, a Cathara diplomatic vessel approached our frontier and requested negotiations." The implications hit HFY like a physical blow. For 3 months, every Coalition xenobiologist had insisted that the Cathara were incapable of communication, that they were essentially a natural force like a hurricane or an asteroid impact. The idea that they could be reasoned with had never been seriously considered. "What did they want?" he asked. Chen's expression shifted to something that looked suspiciously like amusement. "They want us to leave them alone." The conference call that followed included representatives from every major coalition species. The Altarians sent their most experienced diplomat. The Vegans contributed their best xenobiologists. The Centaurians provided their leading military strategists. Everyone wanted to understand how humans had accomplished the impossible. They had made the Kythera back down. The key, Chen explained to the assembled representatives, was understanding that the Kythera aren't a military force. They're not even really an invasive species in the traditional sense. They're more like cosmic gardeners with terrible taste in landscaping. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy from the Kythera perspective. Instead of the political boundaries and territorial claims that dominated coalition maps, the Kythera view showed energy flows, resource densities, and consumption patterns. To the Kythera, galaxies are agricultural projects, Chen continued. They arrive, consume everything, and move on to the next project. They've been doing this for millions of years, and until they met us, they had never encountered a species that treated survival as a competitive sport. The Kythera diplomat, when it finally appeared on screen, was unlike anything in coalition databases. It looked less like a creature and more like a living geological formation, a mass of crystalline structures that shifted and flowed like liquid rock. When it spoke, its voice sounded like distant thunder translated through a universal communicator that was clearly struggling with concepts it had never encountered. "We are confused," the Kythera representative stated. "Your species should not exist. You are too small to threaten us, too few to matter. Yet you make consumption difficult. We do not understand." Admiral Chen leaned forward in her chair. "What don't you understand?" "Why you resist. All species resist initially, but they stop when resistance becomes unprofitable. You make resistance more profitable than surrender. This is illogical." "From our perspective," Chen replied, "surrender is the illogical choice. We're not resisting because it's profitable. We're resisting because the alternative is extinction, and humans have a genetic allergy to extinction." The conversation that followed would later be studied by xenobiologists throughout the galaxy. The Kythera, it turned out, had consumed so many galaxies that they had forgotten that some species considered survival worth any cost. They had become accustomed to civilizations that would calculate the odds, determine that resistance was futile, and surrender to preserve some portion of their population. Humans, with their history of fighting impossible odds and somehow winning through pure stubbornness, were something entirely outside the Kythera's experience. "Your species fights when fighting is illogical," the Kythera diplomat observed. "You continue resistance when resistance is hopeless. You make survival into competition." "Survival isn't competition for us," Chen replied. "Survival is art. And humans have been perfecting that art for 200,000 years. The negotiation took 3 days. The Kythera wanted to understand human motivation. Humans wanted to understand Kythera objectives. The coalition representatives found themselves in the surreal position of mediating between a cosmic force of consumption and a species that had apparently made stubborn resistance into a cultural identity. The final agreement was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. The Kythera would avoid any galaxy containing humans or human-allied species. In exchange, humans would provide detailed maps of galaxies that contained no intelligent life, allowing the Kythera to continue their cosmic gardening without encountering species that turned consumption into a war of attrition. "It's win-win," Chen explained to the coalition leadership after the Kythera diplomat had departed. They get to continue their lifestyle without interference, and we get to live in a galaxy where survival is possible. But the real victory wasn't the treaty. The real victory was what the galaxy had learned about itself. In facing extinction, the Coalition had discovered that survival wasn't just about superior technology or overwhelming force. Survival was about adaptation, creativity, and the absolute refusal to give up. "You've changed us," HFY told Admiral Chen during their final meeting. 6 months ago, we were a loose alliance of species united by common threats. Now we're something else, something stronger. "You've learned to think like humans," Chen replied. "That's both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that you'll never face extinction quietly again. The curse is that you'll never be able to surrender gracefully either." As the human fleet prepared to return to their region of space, they left behind more than just military tactics and defensive strategies. They left behind a new way of thinking about survival. The Coalition had learned that sometimes the best defense wasn't an impenetrable wall, but the promise that any attacker would regret breaking down the door. The final message from Admiral Chen was broadcast to every world in the Coalition. Remember that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. Survival is about being the most stubborn. And if you ever forget that lesson, just ask the Kithara what happens when unstoppable forces meet immovable objects. 6 months later, the Kithara sent a final communication to the galaxy. It was brief, transmitted on all frequencies, and served as both a warning to future cosmic threats and a testament to human influence on galactic thinking. Warning to all consuming entities. This galaxy contains humans. Consumption not recommended. Find alternative feeding grounds. Seriously. And somewhere in the vast space between galaxies, a massive fleet of cosmic consumers was learning to read star charts more carefully, looking for the small notation that had begun appearing on all galactic maps. Warning: contains species that make survival an art form. The galaxy was safe, not because humans had the best weapons or the most advanced technology, but because they had taught everyone else the most important lesson in the universe. Survival is not about avoiding death. Survival is about making death work so hard to claim you that it eventually decides to look for easier prey. And in a universe full of cosmic threats, there was no greater defense than the reputation that some species simply refused to go quietly into extinction. The Kithara had learned this lesson the hard way. Future threats would hopefully be smart enough to learn it the easy way. But if they didn't, well, the galaxy now knew how to teach it. Cation, debris field construction, and what humans called persistence packages. Automated systems designed to continue causing problems long after the defenders had moved on. "You're giving away your military secrets," HFY observed. "Knowledge wants to be free," Chen replied. "Besides, the more species that know how to fight like humans, the safer the galaxy becomes. The Kithara will return, but when they do, they'll find a galaxy full of worlds that have learned to make consumption very expensive. But perhaps the most important lesson was the simplest one. As the human fleet disappeared into faster-than-light travel, they left behind a message that was soon transmitted to every world in the galaxy. Survival is not about being the strongest or having the best technology. Survival is about refusing to give up and making your enemies regret ever picking a fight with you. The message was signed simply, "Humans making survival an art form." Since 200,000 BCE, HFY found himself wondering if he had just made a deal with saviors or devils. The humans seemed confident, but 50 small ships against 3 moon-sized Kithara vessels seemed like suicide. Yet something in Admiral Chen's manner suggested that humans had faced impossible odds before and found ways to make the impossible possible. As he watched the human ships disappear into faster-than-light travel, Zeftai could only hope that human stubbornness was as effective against cosmic-level threats as their history suggested. The Coalition would soon learn that when humans made survival an art form, the art they created was something beautiful, terrible, and absolutely unforgettable.